I've been rooting for the underdogs for as long as I can remember, always finding myself drawn towards the obscure, the unpopular. A wise man once said, the masses are always wrong, and while that may not be accurate for all instances, I think it applies here. So in the 80s, when every kid either had or wanted the NES, well, my mom got me the Sega Master System, which I still have in pretty pristine condition to this day. I actually own 2 Master Systems. Why? Well, that's kind of like asking me, Wayne, why do you have 3 Xbox 360s, 3 OG Xboxes, 3 PS4s, so on and so forth? You get the picture. I've been in this for a little over a minute, and it shows. Sega played an integral role in molding me into the person I am today. Now, I know that may sound unnecessarily deep to the uninitiated, but real gamers will get it. As gaming is no longer relegated to a childish pastime, you can ask the last guy who earned 6 figures at an esports event. He'll tell you. Today I present to you in no particular order my personal top 20 Sega Master System games. Take note, I said personal, so more than likely, most of you will have different opinions. Feel free to share them in the comments. Happy 60th anniversary, Sega. You were able to make a less than stellar childhood bearable.
Get ready.
In 1988, Sega developed and published Afterburner, and I got it the same year. Coming from the Atari 2600, these visuals were mind-blowing. You flew from stage to stage, barrel rolling and taking down the enemy in fine style. If you were at the back of the box, you'd see some semblance of a story perhaps, but no story needed in games like these. In the true spirit of retro gaming, and the try and to try again formula we grew accustomed to, these games were all about fast reflexes and a passion for self-inflicted punishment. I actually find it hilarious when I hear current-gen gamers talk about how hard games like Souls are. Hey, go beat Contra with 3 lives and then we'll talk. Other than the impressive visuals and gameplay, what gets me every time with Afterburner is that opening track. I'm certainly no fan of music, but I found my head bobbing every time this played, so if you're not feeling this, then hey, perhaps you have no soul. While everyone else was going crazy over some plumber and his brother with an obvious addiction to shrooms, I was getting acquainted with this little dude and his gigantic head. Alex Kidd High-Tech World, also known as Anmitsu Hime in Japan, was released exclusively for the Master System in 1989. I found the disparity in level design particularly interesting in this one. It starts off pretty slow in an adventure RPG style, then changes to more of a platformer. While even back then platformers were not my favorites, it most certainly served its purpose well. Also known as Alex Kidd No Miracle in Japan, in 1986, Sega released Alex Kidd in Miracle World, which was my preferred in the franchise. This took a more conventional approach to mascot games. This felt like 100% side-scrolling action, with annoying water stages thrown in to solidify its authenticity. Should you feel like checking some of these games out from the list, including this one, they're available as a part of the Sega Ages collection on PS3, PS4, and Switch. So, it's not too late to help out the city of Redactia, should you feel inclined. Now, if this list were in order of preference, this title would take the number 1 spot. Released November 1986 on the Master System and the Atari 5200, also known as Hakuto no Ren in Japan, of the Fist of the North Star franchise. This was my Kung Fu. By that I mean, one of my favorite games of the 8-bit generation was Kung Fu on the NES. Some may know it as Kung Fu Master in the arcades. Now, while Black Belt was by no means the same, it was still one lone badass walking from left to right, kicking and punching his way to the end. And that was good enough for me. Back in the 80s, I played this so much I got so good at it, it almost felt like I could run through the entire game with my eyes closed. Now, not so much. A remake was released as part of the Sega Ages collection on the PS2. But it wasn't the same. Flashier graphics, but something was seriously missing. I don't know, maybe it's soul. Released in 1986 in the arcades on the SG-1000, the NES, and of course the Master System, Shoplifter is another one that could hold the top 3 spot on this list, were it in order of preference. Your mission was simple: take off, pick up the POWs, and drop them back to safety, all while dodging oncoming enemy fire. Easier said than done though. But then hey, walking sims were not around yet. So as gamers we expected a challenge for every game we played, and Shoplifter on the Master System certainly delivered just that. Also known as Chawan Senshi Borgman. Hang on, let me apologize, as I know I must be sodomizing these pronunciations right about now. But yeah, released by Activision in 1988, this was one of the titles I got long after getting the console. That takes you through somewhat of a mini labyrinth, where your objective was to find various items in each level as you progress towards the final boss. I never got too far in this one, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. With good visuals for the time, but slightly awkward controls. I also suspect, based on the asking price for this on Amazon, this may very well be a collector's item. Someone once told me he played Call of Duty Modern Warfare till the disc stopped working. I didn't even know this was possible. But if it were possible for someone to play a cartridge-based game till it expired, that someone would be me, and the game would be Double Dragon on the Master System. Released in 1988 by Sega, with co-op martial arts action and an infinite continue feature. Yes, in the 80s and 90s, we referred to this as just that, a continue feature. At least where I'm from. So you could play this to the end every time without worrying about how much you suck. I can't count the amount of times I saw that lady take that brutal gut punch, and then fighting my twin brother at the end. In 1987, when Sega released this, light guns were still in full effect, and this here, Gangster Town, was my go-to. It's another easy win, but unforgettable nonetheless. In the 1920s, your city is overrun by crime, and you, an FBI agent, needs to set things right. Released in 1987 by developer Compile and published by Sega, Ghostbusters on the Master System was one of those games where, despite the fact that the game came with a physical instruction manual, I never quite figured it out until maybe a year after I got it. It just felt like a weird and incoherent experience, for lack of a better word. I was young to literally everything in the 80s though, including video games, so once I figured this out, yeah, the feeling of accomplishment was like no other. It's relatively pricey for a classic, so I'll also go ahead and assume this may be another collector's piece. Developed and published by Sega in 1986, simply titled World Grand Prix. This was an F1 racer where you basically toured the globe in under 4 minutes, and should you feel inclined, you could go do it all again. World Grand Prix had a gear system as well that I never really got. It was there, you could shift from high to low, but I really didn't see the point of it. None of this mattered though. I played this till the cows came home. Released in 1985, bundled with my console at the time, Hang On came with Safari Hunt, and what can I say, this was the game that got me interested in motorcycle games, and who knows, perhaps motorcycles, as I've always loved them and got my first superbike, a Kawasaki Ninja, when I was about 19. This was another racer where you raced the clock, not the other guys on the track. Your objective was to catch the checkpoints before the clock ran out. Rinse and repeat should you wish. Repetition was a common practice and expectation in video games at that time, and as a kid, I was more than happy to hop on that hamster wheel time and time again. Released in 1988 exclusively for the Master System, which was also known as the Sega Mark III in Japan, and this game was also known as Lord of Sword in that region. I'll go ahead and come clean about this one. I never got too far in it. But it was my Castlevania at the time, and I was more than happy to try my hands at it. With good 8-bit visuals, a banging soundtrack, and reasonable controls with the exception of having to push up in order to jump, I had a decent time with this one. Released in 1986 by Sega, known as Ashura in Japan and Secret Command in Europe and Australia. Now, one of the most interesting things to me about games of this era was how devs approached each console version. It wasn't like today where, you play a title on your PS5 or Series X and they're pretty much identical with maybe some exclusive content thrown in. A title made for the Sega Master System and the NES could easily turn out very different. Ninja Gaiden comes to mind, and the same here with Rambo. I hated Rambo on the NES, but I loved this version. A top-down shooter where your aim was to kill the bad guys and free as many POWs as you could. I've said this before and I will say it again. Perhaps since the last 2 decades or so, another term was coined by the video game world, called rhythm games. But back in the 80s and 90s, in the 80s especially, every game was just that. And once you've secured a rhythm, these games can be run through in sometimes less than half hour. It's not until present time that I realized many of these 8 and 16-bit action titles were incredibly short. It was the difficulty levels that made them seem to last forever. Anyway, Rambo on the Master System, one of my top 5s. Another from Sir Sly himself, released in 1987, Rocky on the Master System was another that took up loads of my time. While not up there in my top 5, this game was still one of my favorites. It's pretty difficult though, as the gameplay isn't skill-based. It depends on how fast you can rub or tap those 2 buttons, and how willing you are to endure the blistered thumbs that followed. It was still a good time nonetheless. I guess under those circumstances the term ignorance is bliss applies. You fought against Lang, Apollo, and Drago. Now, I never beat Drago, and playing it now, I can't even get past Mr. T. But this asinine approach to gameplay was sufficient back then, I suppose. This one also comes with a relatively hefty price tag online, brand new. Released in 1988 by Sega, Shinobi sealed the deal for me. There are 3, maybe 4 games on this list that solidified my faith in Sega as a software and hardware giant. I was enamored with the visuals, the controls, the sound, but this is another I never completed. Seemed hard as nails at the time. That made me love it no less though. I remember the first time I saw that slow motion jump. Mind was officially blown. Another of my top 5s, released by Sega in 1987 and now going for a whopping $150 online. Space Harrier personifies the word classic. Sega used to call some of these games mega cartridges. This one I believe was called a 2 mega cartridge, and one of the main differences I noticed as a child with these games were that some talked. Yeah, younger viewers must be facepalming right now, but to have a game speak even 1 line of dialogue in the 80s was impressive. So when I died the first time and the character got up and said, get ready. Man, I think I called my mom and brother in the room to share in my amazement. On the subject of your character, I know I could simply Google this, but if anyone knows, tell me this, was your character a man or a woman? I always thought it was a man when I played it on the Master System. I mean, it does sound like a man, but when I see other ports, even the one here on the PS2, it looks kind of like a girl to me. Anyway, Space Harrier had you flying stage to stage, shooting up some of the most bizarre enemies I can recall seeing in that generation. Didn't beat this one either, but hey, the experience still stands out. Released by Sega in 1986, The Ninja is also up there, high on my list of favorites. This is another title that I had to revisit long after I bought it. It was just way too difficult. But then one day, I picked it up, I found that rhythm I spoke of earlier, and bam, I was running through the stages with no problem. It's another top-down action title where you move from the bottom of the screen to the top, taking out bosses and sub-bosses alike, till it's a wrap. The year is 1640 and your feudal lord has passed and a tyrant has taken his place. Start out with simple throwing knives and the vanishing ability, upgrade your attacks and make your way to the end. I had great times with the ninja. Another game which sole purpose at the time seemed to be to test your mettle, released by Sega in 1988. Thunderblade was a hard-as-hell helicopter game where you played as the gunship gladiator, a one-man wrecking team. Thunderblade was one of the earlier titles I got for the Master System. Its difficulty was a tad above my pay grade at the time, but good times nonetheless. Released in 1987 by Sega, Zillion was another slow burn for me. It was a game that at the time I did not understand, but kids develop real fast, I guess. Zillion reminds me of Cyborg Hunter. You go through a labyrinth, unlocking doors, making your way to the end with a fair amount of backtracking. It had no appeal at first, but then I figured out what these symbols meant, then put two and two together, and I was able to power through this. Released in 1987 by Sega, Outrun was another racer where you were up against the clock. Again, you had that odd gear mechanic, just like the one in World Grand Prix. And just as in World Grand Prix, it made very little sense. But Outrun is just that chill go-to racing game with forgiving controls and some cool, try-hard 8-bit music. You can check out much more refined versions in the Sega Ages compilations. Another one for the history books. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments section below what Sega Master System games are your favorites. Which ones did I miss? If you like my content, feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. If you'd like to support this channel, become a Patreon. On the other hand, if this vid pissed you off, then take necessary actions. The dislike and unsubscribe buttons aren't there for show. Either way, I won't hold it against you though. Our game is never over.